Yes, welcome. This is F a Rap Critic. I'm your boy Malik-16, the founder and creator of Plates and Crates. And no, I'm not oblivious to the fact that this is a different background than you may be used to, but change is good. And not only is this the new setup, and not only is this episode 15, but it's a very special episode. Why? Because it's your boy's birthday. Yes, shout out to the Libra gang, all the Libras, all the October babies. Shout out to you. And things are moving the way they're supposed to move. If you've been a day one viewer and follower and supporter, then you might have picked up on some things that I mentioned in early episodes, like 1 or 2, about how I want things to go with this channel, things to expect, the little changes and switch ups towards the end of the year. We already started our 1996 for the rest of the year campaign, where we go over nothing but albums turning 25 this year. We're continuing that. There's a few more things I got in the clip for you, so stay tuned, keep watching, keep checking up, hit that notification bell so you can keep up with the updates. And this will be the perfect opportunity for me to remind you, if this is your very first time or you haven't yet, take a minute to like and subscribe to the channel. And keep leaving comments, man. I see a lot of y'all were feeling the Tupac episode. Thank you for all the love. Thank you for all the feedback. Let me know which albums you'd like me to cover for the next year. Coming in 2022, I would be more than happy to take your requests. Keep making sure that you chime in and make sure that they're classics though. So with that said, as much as I try to keep this as an unbiased channel and as objective as possible when we're talking about subjective material, because it's my birthday, I'm gonna cheat a little bit. I'm still gonna keep the criteria of the channel, so the albums that I talk about are still gonna be widely considered classics for hip hop, but I might just do 2 albums that I personally consider to be my favorites, and I feel like I reserve the right to do that just because it's the birthday, right? So y'all cut me a little slack when I give you a little leeway. It's the only time of year that I will do this. The rest of the year it'll be, unbiased. The review's still gonna be unbiased, but rock with me. The album that is being reviewed today is almost single-handedly the most impactful and influential album on me as a young rapper. This album came out and I didn't know that things that were being done on this album could be done. And so the album we're talking about is the classic Illadelph Half-Life by The Roots. And a lot of people think that this is the sophomore album for The Roots. This is actually album number 3 in their entire catalog, following Organics and Do You Want More. And this is going to be the category 1 review of that album, where we go over the product itself, the album, and let's jump into it. The first dimension we're going to be talking about is dimension 1, the quality of production. And from the rip, what makes this unique is the fact that The Roots are a band. Not just a band of professional musicians who at their core are hip hop. And some of that might have gotten lost in the sauce with the previous album. Do You Want More? The singles were very jazzy with the exception of Distortion and Static. If you were a casual listener, then it may be easy to have written them off in that category that it began to emerge of other. And while we had alternative hip hop acts like Arrested Development at the beginning of the 90s, and Arrested Development really detests that term. They consider themselves to be hip hop, but I think the general public considers them to be alternative. And then you would start getting truly alternative acts because hip hop had grown and become this wider presence by the mid 90s. So you had acts like Spearhead and Buckshot the Funk. And I think The Roots, one of their superpowers has always been their awareness. They keep their fingers on the pulse of the industry, and they always kind of knew how they were being perceived. We'll talk more about that in further dimensions. But because of that, there was a deliberate and concerted effort to make sure this album was undeniably hip hop. And Questlove mentions in his memoir, Mo Meta Blues, that they went in saying, oh no, they're not gonna be the soft guys. They don't want the same reception that they got from the previous album. They want it to be a kind of make no mistake sentiment here. And that's pretty much what was accomplished. Questlove also mentions that at some point he had started getting criticism from DJs and within the band for his drumming style on the prior album. And so he went, locked himself away, and did like this deep study and really crafted and obsessively honed in the sound that he wanted to approach this album with. And so what you get is this marriage of the Roots saying, we'll meet the industry halfway. They brought in an outside producer named Kilo, who engineered and produced on the album and helped bring in some of the more standard traditional hip hop production style, the electronic, the drum kits and all of that stuff. And then married and paired that with their live instrumentation. And the end result is a decidedly boom bap, a grittier, an even darker album that has range. And in the De La episode, we mentioned how those members made a concerted effort to make this their most boom bap album. We were talking about Stakes is High, and that's the same kind of thing that was going on here. This was boom bap, but this was also a show off album. And we'll talk more about the correlation with De La Soul later on, but the range and the show off aspect comes from just how many sounds you get on one album. And so that pairing, Kilo's guidance and Kilo's ability to blend with what the Roots were doing. First of all, the Roots, this confused me when I was a kid too, reading the liner notes. The Roots were crediting themselves as producers under the name the Grand Niggas. So different members, and we're talking about the roster at this point is the roster that's kind of cemented in everyone's memory. It's Questlove on the drums, Lynn Hubbard on the bass, and Kamal had emerged as the face of the keys since Scott Storch, who did a lot of the key work on the previous albums, had exited the group. And so Kamal was now your key guy. And then, you have Rozelle and Scratch, who provide the equivalent of production ad-libs. So they're doing vocal production with their mouths. And they come here and there, and that blends seamlessly too. So things that just weren't really incorporated at these prominent levels in hip hop. We've always had beatboxing, but these guys were assuming the properties of instruments. Rozelle and Scratch were using their voices as other tools, and that in itself is an outstanding and kind of really unique thing, and you won't notice it. So on a song like Panic, you don't know where Rozelle's vocal instrumentation is happening, and this is the same effect you get with Kilo and the Grand Niggas coming together. It's like you don't know where the live instrumentation ends and where the studio production begins, and they just go into each other like hand in glove. And so a great example of that is Respond, React. As soon as the album starts, it sets the album off. As soon as you hear those drum kicks that build up, that boom, 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 you get the sense that you're in for something eventful, and you do. And the keys start coming in, but by the time the main hypnotic melody starts playing with those warbled keys, you understand, this is not something that you could peg for all band produce, where I think, again, the singles and a lot of the instrumentation and production on Do You Want More, I hate to compare albums, would be something that the general public would be like, oh yeah, I can see how, I expect that sound from a rap band, from a hip hop band. Here, you would not know, They also said they wanted to sample, so sampling is on this album, but they also wanted to sample themselves. So using things that sounded sample where they were still original words. So you get a sample like Section. And this used to trip me out too, because this album came out the same year as Redman released Muddy Waters. And on Redman's track uses the same sample that the Roots use on Section. His is a slowed down version. The Roots keep theirs mid-tempo, which is, you know, a break from how Respond React comes in, because it's like this unrelentless, you know, pounding kind of beat. Section is still boom bap and mid-tempo. It still keeps a pace, but it's a smoother type of song due to that sample. And so you get that, you get a song like Concerto de Desperado, where again, they're blending these operatic sounds with Lynn Hubbard playing the cello and vocal arrangements that are part of the production as well. You just didn't know sounds like that could be made into hip hop. No Alibi, where there's these warped video game sounds, these like alien lasers that, it sounds like you're in a lab watching things being produced on a video game level with the bad guy, right? But again, voices are used as a main component of the beat, and you know, I think that's a complete Kilo production there. And you know, those decisions were deliberate. The bubble sounds on Push Up Your Lighter, experimental stuff that didn't seem experimental at all because they just go. Now, you get other outside producers like Chaos, and Kilo and Chaos really help add to the darkness of the album. We're talking dark, it fits perfectly in this era of 1996 where a lot of hip hop albums on the East Coast were decidedly dark because we were still coming from that Wu-Tang influence. And so, you know, it just don't stop. Episodes, I mentioned No Alibi, even Clones and Concerto, dark, Panic, dark. And then it's balanced by this other production, which we'll talk about in the next dimension. But we have other outside producers who are notable on this album too. So this is another really interesting feat. We got Joshua Redman, who plays on the jazz song One Shine, because they still want to let you know they're still a band at the core. So they're like, no, we didn't forget the jazziness. We're just not going to let the jazziness overwhelm this album. But One Shine is just a straight up jazz song that takes the album out on the music side. And you also have Q-Tip producing under the Uma, which was him and Ali Shaheed Muhammad. And we also know, as mentioned in the Daylight episode, this is the beginning of Jay Dilla being a part of this fold, which was native tongues joining the new wave of people who were creating this neo-soul sound, the king and queen of neo-soul, Erykah Badu, D'Angelo, and the seedlings of what would become the Soulquarians. Now, D'Angelo also plays on this album on the track that he's on. You get production from Slim Kid Trey from the Far Side and L.A.J. And then, of course, you have Raphael Sadiq, who's always involved in everybody's project and plays masterfully, kills the bass lines on What They Do and some other arrangements on that track. And so plenty of outside production on top of this in-house enclave and collective that they had made, where, you know, the range of sounds is just unbelievable on this album. Even the skits are musical, where, you know, there's these vocal battles of, you know, Rozelle sounding like a horn or Scratch sounding like he's doing his own mix show. So really, really groundbreaking stuff here that probably doesn't get all the credit that it deserves. But something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to the second dimension, which is the cohesiveness of this sonic bed. So if we're talking about a range, a nice cast of producers here, how does it all sound together? All right, so the Roots did something on this album that I also had not heard a lot in 1996. I think the Fugees did it on the score a little bit, but the Roots were making songs seamlessly blend into each other. So I mentioned how Respond React is this like energetic, unrelentless track, and then it smooths out going into Section, where it doesn't slow things down at all, because again, we're going from, you know, similar tempos into another, but the sounds that were used are what mellows things out. And it sounds a little bit more carefree. It's still spitting with the same tenacity, but the beat makes it seem a little bit more radio friendly. It makes it seem a little bit more, you know, kind of laid back, right? Then we go into Panic. And Panic comes in with these rattling sounds and creeping notes of alarm. By the time, you know, the kind of siren sounds come in, you understand that this is going into a more serious place. And the album holds us in that serious place for about the next 4 songs. So Panic comes in and commands your attention. You want to hear what's going on because now the bass line is running. It's running. It's more up-tempo than the last song. And so it matches the pace of Black Thought's rapping, and it also matches the mood and tone of what's being said. And as soon as that comes in, it comes out. It rattles out the same way, and it leaves you on this cliffhanger of, okay, what's next? And that question gets answered before you can even finish asking it, because the next serious sound comes in with these voices that loom and let you know, okay, this is about to be another serious dark song too. And as soon as the drum hits, you know that it just don't stop. It's coming on, and we're talking about some heavy stuff too. Same thing is followed with Episodes, comes in with, you know, more blaring horns, voices, ends with voices. And by the time you get to Push Up Your Lighter, this is the segue into the softer song, which is the radio single, What They Do. So Push Your Lighter is the intermediate. It's the buffer between. It's not gritty. It's still a little dark and murky, so it has that underground feel, but it's not light enough to be commercial or radio friendly. So it's the buffer between them. And then as soon as you get comfortable with What They Do and they let that ride out, Concerto comes in. That's how the album goes. Towards the end, you start experimenting with more jazzy sounds. You get, you know, Hypnotic and One Shine, which is the jazz song. I don't think you get anything as simple as Ital, other than Clones, which is not simple because the decision to have that Quincy Jones Summer in the City sample for the hook breaks up the simplicity of the beat, which is just this cascading drum hitting with this like ragtime piano notes, this incessant that ding 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 ding, which goes on to become a classic hip hop staple, an underground classic. Every hip hop freestyle over that beat has been legendary. You're not gonna go to a backpack event and not hear that song. Similar to what was mentioned again in the Daylight episode with the song The Business. These beats have become a part of underground hip hop folklore and legend. And so the ability to make these different kind of sounds just fall into each other. When you play one track, you'll hear the tail end of another track. And the only times you get breaks is if the song abruptly ends. And then as soon as it abruptly ends, the drum hit introduces the next song. You're not getting a lot of minutes to breathe. You might get some of these skits, but even the skits are musical. A real testament to having that many different chefs in the kitchen and it not clashing. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 3. Is there an intentional mood or tone on this album? All right, now we mentioned this being a deliberate effort to crystallize the roots as a hip hop group, as rap, not as other, not as alternative, not as this band that does rap, but hip hop. And so the mood is serious. There's not a moment where the group is not being serious. There's not a lot of humor here. The levity comes in the other things outside of the album where you start learning who the roots are. Even the cover art is a statement on how seriously they want it to be taken, and that becomes iconic because it was recreated in other media. The levity may also come in the beats. When you get to Section and you get to What They Do and Hypnotic, you understand that there are shades to the group. They're not just all gonna be in this dark space. And if you were familiar with them from their previous work, you know darkness isn't where they stay long. But this was to prove a point. This is saying, we are from the streets of Philly. So overarching everything is this idea that Philadelphia is the place. The album, if you had it on tape, you had the 215 side and you had the 610 side. So they're repping Philly all throughout, right? And then also Take Us Seriously without this, I gotta prove something. There is no feeling of I gotta prove. There's a feeling of we're gonna be heard. We don't care who hears us, but we're gonna be heard. There's this, we already know feel. And they did already know. The confidence these guys were rapping with. And you know, my kid ego, I was like, I never even heard these guys. How could they be so confident? No one even knows them like that. And it proved itself. It stood on its own. Clones made you believe that these guys were a threat in the rap world. And that is the sentiment that you can find all throughout the album. You will believe, by the time you get to You and I Verse at War, you're like, yeah. Yeah. And so there's the Take Us Serious. Philadelphia is a serious place and we are serious people. And we're also professional musicians. You get all of that from one album. And the tone is set from the beginning of even the experimental overlapping pan voices describing hip hop and introducing the roots. So you hear the roots being introduced in the background while like the likes of Harry Allen and Cornel West and Chuck D are talking about hip hop. So you make no mistake that this is a hip hop group. That's what they set out to do. That's what was accomplished. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 4, right? The repetition of sounds versus the song distinction. How diverse were the sounds and the words used? What do y'all think? The range of sounds is just, again, you're getting opera, you're getting jazz, you're getting boom bap, and then so many other elements. You're getting sampling, you're getting originality, you're getting dark, you're getting light, you're getting funk. Not a lot of things get repeated here. You know, you can feel like maybe that dark sequence I described where it goes from panic to It Just Don't Stop to episodes may feel a little similar, but that's more the tone, not the sounds used. Just know it's a wide range, very little repetition of sounds here. And then when we're talking about words, same thing. You are talking about wordsmiths here. A lot of people, when we get duos of rappers, they always feel forced to choose one or the other unless they're a homogenized kind of group. And I think the interesting thing with the Roots at this point in time, people understood them as a group. It wasn't this Black Thought and, you know, or Questlove, and it was a whole group. Everyone was represented evenly. And Malik-B, you know, rest in peace, was rapping at the same level as Black Thought, and I don't think there was a lot of room for comparison back then. I think people just accepted the Roots as being beasts on the mic, and you know, with that, they were using words very, very deliberately, specifically, and with a style that didn't leave a lot of room for repeating the same things. The only things you're gonna hear repeated are those branding notes. The crew, you're gonna hear the Fifth Dynasty, you know, you're gonna hear a lot of street names in Philadelphia. Back Route, Snyder Avenue, you know, Malik-B for sure was just naming hella streets in Philly that I didn't catch on to till later years when I spent more time visiting Philly and really were reading and paying attention. I'm like, oh, that is a Philly thing. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. How much repetition and song distinction did you pick up on this album? All right, dimension 5, the amount of songs versus the amount of content. So this is a 20-track album, and technically there are 15 of those that are actual songs. If you count the little vocal skits where, you got Roselle and Scratch, doing their thing, cool. But for the most part, 15 actual songs, one of those being One Shine, which is the jazz song. So really 14 where you're getting like straight up rap. Panic being a short song, but still a song, right? And Panic represents this shift in them talking about something real, something dealing with the world around them, their local environment, Philly. But again, like I told you, Philly was a big focal point on this album. And so the Roots were following a formula that was pretty tried and true in the mid-90s, and I'm kind of sad to see that it got abandoned afterwards. But a marker of a good album used to be the sequencing, which, for rap albums, your first 2 to 3 songs were supposed to feel monumental. They were supposed to feel like, your first song was supposed to feel like an intro, right? And this is you just showcasing raw skills. This song is supposed to be the song that comes on that people just want to turn up whatever they play in their car specifically and really like, oh wow, I'm in for something, right? Whether it's short or it's a long intro. The point is you're supposed to do your self-definition and get the mood and the tone set for what they can expect of your rap ability. It's not about, the hit so much on the first song. And you can do that, you can get away with that for about the first 3 songs. You're just spitting. And then somewhere around song 3, 4, 5, you want to start talking about something else, whether it's your relationship song or your content. And that's what the Roots do. So you get Respond, React, which is, coming out the gate, I'm spitting, I'm letting you know we're no joke. Section, which is the softer version of that, still spitting, letting you know we're no joke, but this beat might get a wider kind of play to have that message carried. But by the 3rd song, Panic, we're talking about the violence and the craziness of life in Philadelphia. Something that I don't know if a lot of people had on their radar in 1996 hip-hop community, because we were so divided by then. And this is East Coast, West Coast beef. People were so distracted by that and not paying attention. Look, all these cities have similar things going on, man. Philly is a violent place. You didn't think of this. You just thought of brotherly love, Rocky, and cheesesteaks. It's like, no, this was the beginning of what we now know Philly to be. 15 songs, the weight of those distinctly content-heavy songs is so full that it almost balances things out. You get enough here where the songs are not overwhelmingly about one thing, but something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5. Heartbeats, that takes us to dimension 6, the features. Whoa, we talked about the features on production, the actual features performance-wise. You have the vocal features. There was a drive here to not have traditional singing on this album. All the singing on this album, except for what they do with Raphael Saadiq, is this jazz-influenced, gothic, kind of ghostly harmonizing in the background. So Hypnotic doesn't even have a hook, it's just D'Angelo doing that, mumble harmonizer is so soulful that he's doing it without. I don't think D'Angelo says a clear word on that whole song. It's just he's just harmonizing throughout. Even Cassandra Wilson on the One Shine song. Jazzy Fat Nasties, Pamela Rue doing a full-out opera, soprano wail on Concerto de Desperado. Just things you have not heard. They were really, really playing with what's possible in hip hop. And the vocals are part of the production arrangement, so you're gonna get that. Now, as far as the rap features, you got Mars Co-op, Master Allah, Ruler Savior, who a lot of people say stole the show on Clones. He sets it off. This is a hallmark of what the Roots do on every album. They include a legend on their albums often, and then they introduce someone on the come up. Usually it's a local Philly artist. It later branched out to just be someone they rocked with and thought was dope. Later on albums, they had Blue, they had Wale when he was first coming out, and they just continued that on PD Crack. But, here you're getting Mars, you're getting Dice Raw, who, a lot of people consider to be an off and on member. And then you're also getting these outside features, which were a big deal from the Roots coming from being, on the obscure end of hip hop the year or two before. Now they have big underground names like Common and Q-Tip and Bahamadia, of course, local talent, but still dopeness. The people that the Roots decided to get as features match their level for the most part. And we'll talk about Q-Tip, who I think has the weakest feature on here, because when you hear Black Thought go back and forth with Common on You and I Verse at War, you're like, man, they should do this more often. You almost didn't feel like, damn, Malik-B's presence was missed here. Why didn't he get a verse? Because their back and forth cohesiveness and just melding was smooth and seamless, and they were just really bar for bar going at equal pacing and just like killing it and complimenting each other so well. So by the time you get to iTown and you hear Black Thought doing the same with Q-Tip, not only does it sound a little clumsy because they approached it differently, they're going over each other, almost like they didn't record it in the same space, and Q-Tip is preparing his beginning of his verse parts as Black Thought is finishing his verse part. So you'll hear Q-Tip starting to rap over the ending of Black Thought's last bar line, and it's like, hold on. And it's not like Q-Tip is saying anything amazing. Q-Tip says, simple stuff like too cool for school fools or something like that. And it's like, Q-Tip is liable to say anything on a song sometimes, most times, and it becomes very evident on here where Black Thought is so in pocket and so precise with the words he chooses and his flow, and Q-Tip is just kind of being abstract and doing stream of consciousness. And so, that takes us into the next dimension, but the features here are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. How standout were they? How brilliant were they? How much did they help? How much did they hurt? Dimension 7. How weak was the weakest song, and do the weakest songs on the album bring it down? It depends on if you feel like there are any weak songs. If you think that the song One Shine is a complete takeaway from the album because it's this jazz song that comes out of nowhere, and they should have ended the album with a rap song since they were out to prove they're a rap group and it's a rap album ended on one last rap song, then you might feel like that's a weakness. And that goes for the spoken word piece that really ends it with the Ursula Rucker poetry outro. If you feel like it should have ended with the Roots voices, with rap, then you're gonna see both of those as weak. No Great Pretender is the Malik-B solo. That is the closest to old Roots jazziness that you hear. I think there's like horns, and it sounds like after work jazz to some extent. It's one of the more laid back tracks on the album. I mentioned the Q-Tip feature. I don't think it weighs the album down. I think, it's one of those songs that ends up at the end of the album. We talk about this often, how sometimes you can tell that maybe the artist thought that certain songs weren't as strong by their placement. And I think if you were gonna have the song on the album, it's in the perfect place. It is the last rap song before the album closes, but you still get to hear Black Thought spit, you still get to hear Q-Tip. The contrast of their voices is great. So that is the saving grace of that track. And it's catchy. The beat is simple, so it's catchy. But I do think it is maybe the weakest song on the album. I would love to hear what you all think the weakest song is. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to Dimension 8, Mass Appeal. I think the Roots, we talked about their awareness. I think they knew where they stood in hip hop. I think they knew not to shoot for the stars. They were also on a newer label. Geffen was a pretty new offshoot of David Geffen Company, and I think they knew how far of a push they were gonna get. 1996, I always define it as this era where you're guaranteed 3 singles, 3 videos. The Roots got it. The singles were Clones, Concerto to Desperado, and What They Do. And you know, the decisions made in those videos and singles also defined and showcased where the Roots thought they were going to go and what they were aiming at. If the goal was to prove to the industry and the casual hip-hop fan that they were undeniably hip-hop, you know, then mission accomplished. You don't need to shoot for, you know, Puff Daddy level success, because now people know who you are. Clones cemented them as an underground hip-hop act, and what actually happened, and we'll talk about in the next dimension from that, is probably more important than anything. And by the time Concerto comes, they introduce something new to hip-hop that hadn't been done. And then by the time What They Do comes out, they did get radio play. Now, this album didn't ship a bunch of units. I don't know if it even went gold. I don't think it went gold, but it got a lot of critical acclaim. Most magazines, most publications reviewed it super high and commended the lyrical prowess on there and the production. They all mentioned how dark and gritty the production was, but it was praised. And so I think the Roots knew how far they could go. I don't think, besides What They Do in Section, which wound up being a B-side, that any other tracks on there would have hit radio. Push Up Your Lighter is like a mix show song. Hypnotic would also be a late night mix show song or just a groove song for a cafe. Yeah, it was a very localized outreach attempt. I think the Roots knew where they were gonna go, and I think they got where they knew they were gonna go, which is laying a foundation for them to be able to go even higher on their next album, which they did, which got them mainstream recognition. So this got them hip hop and industry recognition. The next album got them mainstream recognition. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 9, my favorite. The 3 I's: impact, innovation, and influence. All right, we spoke about the De La Soul correlation. I mentioned in the De La review how De La kind of fired the first shot. They shot the flare gun to be the voices of the underground, the angry backpack rappers, soundmen, the voice, the bullhorn. And the Roots kind of picked up and joined in that effort, but in a different way. They weren't angry. They were the hungry snipers. They were the assassins for them. If De La was on the front line with the bullhorn marching, the Roots were on the roof with the scope. So they weren't as antagonistic as De La Soul, but I think they still wound up getting lumped in that mad rapper category, because when the What They Do video came out, they picked up where De La Soul's Ego Trippin' Part 2 video from Balloon Mind State album left off and just did that times 10. So De La did it in a couple scenes where they had, you know, subtitles come across. There were these tongue-in-cheek commentary on what music videos were looking like for hip-hop at the time. The Roots went all out. They were parodying every cliche in hip-hop, from the champagne and the mansions, driving up to the mansions, the pool party scene, the fake, you know, dim lit neo soul video look that was going on, the lightning, the beat down shots, the running, everything you can imagine. They even kind of made fun of the One More Chance video when Questlove said he tried to write a letter apologizing to Diddy and Biggie, but by the time the letter was going to get published in the source, Biggie had passed away. So you couldn't see that from the album. That sarcasm, that jabbing didn't really come on the album. They were talking about fake MCs, perpetrators, and telling you what they were not, but they weren't taking these pot shots at the other rappers. They were just like, hey, this is what we're not. But it's clear who they were aligned with. That's why I say they were the snipers. It's like, we're not gonna be on the front lines, we're not marching, we're not waving the flag, we're not the mad rappers, but if you need us to represent real hip hop, that's what you get. I think they got lumped into the mad rapper category, but people didn't know who they were enough to be like the roots of the mad rappers. I think a lot of people loved the What They Do video. It became iconic because I don't know how many people paid attention to the Ego Tripping video. What They Do kind of overshadowed that. I think people would see Ego Tripping and be like, oh, this is like the Roots video. Concerto de Desperado, as far as innovation, introduced something to the game. These different sounds, the same way Wu-Tang introduced Kung Fu flicks and these gothic, cryptic, and haunting kind of elements. You didn't know you could do real band stuff, and that's what the Roots were showing you. On One Shine, they're showing you they can do full jazz song, no hip hop, just full jazz. And on Concerto de Desperado, showing you can meld and marry rap with anything and still keep it undeniably hip hop. And so there's lots of innovation there. We talked about using the vocals as parts of production. The beginning of the Soulquarians is now we get into the influence. The influence that this album left on the game. I think a lot of rappers stepped up their rap game because now we had spitting, and we had spitting coming from places that we didn't know had spitters like this. Philadelphia was now getting this recognition as being a hub of rappers who rap their ass off, like bar up, flow up, and we'll talk about that in the next category. But yeah, that's your impact, your innovation, and your influence. The Roots were now solidified. People knew their name. They helped Geffen Records have some validity as a label where rappers are on. You know, the GZA was on that label, and then other acts came before that label eventually folded very quickly. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. And that takes us to the final dimension, the overall uniqueness and timelessness of this album. That's dimension 10. This is almost like how Illmatic was critically acclaimed. The masses didn't look into it until later and had to go back and appreciate it. That's what this album is like. 25 years later, and maybe 5 years after this drop, and maybe even after the next album, Things Fall Apart, came out, people went back and discovered Illadelph Half-Life. This album didn't sound like anything else because, again, no albums were blending live instrumentation with that studio production, except for maybe the album that Too Short was doing. When Too Short did his final, or what was his final album then, his 10th album, Getting It, you know, live instrumentation has always been a part of Too Short's process. I think Organized Noise was doing it with the Dungeon Family products, but for the East Coast, for a whole band to be helming the album, nobody was doing that. Marrying those gritty elements with those funky elements like What They Do, and those smoothed out elements like Hypnotic and Section. You're getting traditional sampling, you're getting non-traditional sampling, all kinds of instruments from kalimbas to wah-wah guitars. And no one was rapping how Black Thought and Malik-B were rapping at the time. So many syllables, so much fluidity, and so many, you know, logical things being said within that, where we're melding braggadocio with social commentary. Really different and really timeless, because a lot of those lyrics are better than lyrics that have come out afterwards. Yeah, damn sure influenced me. You know, I think I got accused of rapping too much like Black Thought when I first went to high school, and you can still hear some of the Black Thought and Malik-B in my flow if I was to pick up and rap now. So, you know, something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That concludes the Category 1 review of the classic 1996 album, Illadelph Half-Life by the Roots. My peoples, the Roots. And yeah, please like and subscribe if you have not. Stay tuned for the Category 2 review. Shout out to you if you are a Libra as well. I'm the final day Libra. I close it out, so I feel like, you know, I carry the zodiac sign on my back for everybody. But happy early birthday, happy belated birthday, and I guess to you October Scorpios. Wish me happy birthday in the comments. Let me know which albums you want me to review for the year 2022. Until then, you know what it is. F a Rap Critic. talk about it while I lived it. Word to meth.